Hello everyone. You might remember that a few months ago I've done a short video explaining the advantages of using one of the SD-WAN edges at home, and I ran through a few of the use cases and problems that we're trying to solve. But in today's video, I wanted to share a few news because ever since then the product team has been busy building a few extra options for you to consider. These options can address a wider set of use cases and also make it much more commercially feasible to get this deployed. So first of all, let's remind ourselves what issues can we face when trying to work from home. Well, there are three main aspects that I like to think about. First of all, inside our home network, we might be using a very nice and shiny router from our service providers. But the reality is these routers inside, they're not really amazing. They are just there to give a fair share of the pie to any device that's asking for it. Now think about how many devices in your home you actually have connected to the internet. There's the laptop, another laptop, the tablets, the phones, the doorbell. I know some of us have smart dishwashers and fridges, etc. Now, these devices are on all the time. They are trying to upgrade the software, they're trying to check in, etc. So even if you're not using them, as long as they're not on some sort of flight mode or shut down completely, they will be there trying to battle over the same resources. And the provider router is made for commercial consumption. So it's not going to be able to tell the difference between, for example, an important Skype or Zoom call versus YouTube video, right? Second issue we face is that even if we don't have a lot of devices, even if the router itself is quite strong, we will face contention as our traffic leaves our house and goes further in the aggregation points. So that is the cabinet down the street or the exchange. These networks are not really designed with capacity in mind. And with everybody stuck at home and trying to utilize the network, congestion occurs. And if congestion occurs, what's going to happen? Our packets will either get delayed or dropped altogether. And this results in that poor experience you're facing. You're turning on the video, everything freezes up, calls drop, any sort of uploads and downloads take forever, right? So either inside the local area network or outside, there will be issues that impact us from carrying our work. The third angle that I'd like to see this is from the IT admin's perspective. Because if you're using any, let's say, client VPN, right, which is the primary way of us connecting to our enterprise resources, that has some logs to allow the IT admin to get a glimpse of what's happening, but it does not have sufficient reporting. So in the end, if the IT admin doesn't see anything in those logs, it will tell you to go and call your service provider. And I don't know how service providers are in your area, but I always had a kind of mixed feedback when I had to call them up, complain. Sometimes it might take hours, if not days, for the unstable network to come back to life. Last but not least, the network can go down altogether, right? This is, not a business class connection, right? For those of you who have business broadband at home, good for you. But most of us don't have that option. There is no guarantee that if the line goes down, the service provider will be able to restore it in time. Now, obviously, there are workarounds. I can use my 4G on my phone, I can tether, etc. And, most of us are technical people. So, for us, it's quite easy to find ways. But if you can imagine the usual employees that might not be tech savvy, it will be very, very hard for them to figure out these ways out of the network. Now, at this point, it makes sense to have one of those small appliances at home, right? Because first of all, the IT admin has visibility on what's happening in the environment, has a lot of troubleshooting tools and reporting, so they can isolate the issue rapidly. And then with SD-WAN, they can start enforcing things such as quality of service. So with our solution, you can have your work segment and your home segment, right? You have a few of the important work devices on that particular segment and everything else on the other. And this makes sure that in case of contention, your enterprise kit has the biggest slice of the pie. Going onwards, with the power of the MPO, we can solve any sort of last mile issues. Even with a single link, we have remediation techniques. We discussed about them previously, and whatever that's duplicate packets for UDP, negative acknowledgements, etc. This just gives that extra chance for our devices to send data across in time. But because this box has the option of multiple uplinks, we can now think about reintroducing other things. Maybe a different line from a different provider that sometimes can be an option in different geographies. But nowadays, most of us live with a very good and strong 4G signal. So in that case, we can introduce that either for redundancy purposes or to increase the bandwidth. Because remember, we have the ability to use that link either as a backup or we just leave it on auto and we can actually use the sum of both the links. Now, at this point in time, you can argue that yourselves or maybe the people who work for you are in a stable environment, right? Their broadband doesn't go down much; it's mostly stable. There are obviously areas in the world in which even bandwidth is not really a constraint. So actually, a client VPN would suffice, and I do agree with that. And this is one of the drivers that made us work with the Workspace ONE team to join the solutions together. So a few months ago, we have decided to incorporate them as part of our SASE strategy and host their VPN concentrators inside the VeloCloud POPs. So this means that as opposed to you putting that unified access gateway, that VPN concentrator in your own data center, have a totally separate solution for your remote clients, bring them all back to your data center, and then from there branch out to your cloud security or IaaS services, etc., which again is something that we are trying to go away with SD-WAN, right? Why backhaul everything to your data center? We're eliminating that complexity because if we host that UAG for you in our own POPs, not only you can out of there break out very easily to any services you want to. So this means no suboptimal routing. This means less latency and also less probability that something in the middle will fail. But also it comes at no capex cost. So you don't need to buy the server, install the hypervisor, take care of that. We take that complexity away. So we have these two options on the table. We have a full-blown SD-WAN to the home, make your home a small branch option, and the client VPN option that actually allows you to enforce the same policy and also benefit from the same quality without the expense that building new infrastructure would entail. And the question remains, okay, which solution is best for what user? And for this, you have to think about it in this way. You have your standard users, and these are the users that if something happens with their home networks, everything is fine. There is no loss in productivity in case they are offline for a few hours, in case the video is not working well, right? And you have these power users who are critical for the business and they need to be on all the time. Now, traditionally, execs always had some sort of router at home in order to enable them to have that extra quality on top of what a client VPN brings. But we're advocating that other parts of the business are also as important. It might be the operations team who needs to have access to all the resources in order to have the visibility and the troubleshooting capability. We're talking about doctors, so they can have a proper video assessment with the patients. We're talking about teachers who need to be able to share and utilize the new and amazing teaching apps, and call center employees. So if yourselves as a business needs to interact with your own customers, you need to make sure that that experience is as best as possible, no matter if your call center staff are no longer on premise. Another area that just spring to mind quite recently was the likes of power users who do a lot of video editing, because for them, maybe it's not as important that the latency is quite high, but they need that extra bandwidth that they cannot build themselves with just one circuit. So a lot of use cases, you can use both solutions at the same time, right? So it's not an either or. It's just for you to decide from your workforce which of them are the standard users and which of them are the power users, because we have a solution for each of those use cases. So now, what's new? I mean, we have discussed some of these things previously, right? What's new is that now we have 2 new SKUs to make the edge at home much more commercially viable. So before, it was not different from deploying a 510 in a branch as compared to deploying a 510 at home. The whole licensing and support was exactly the same. We now have a standard and a pro SKU that is just geared for home use. And it comes at a significant lower price point than a normal SD-WAN for branch would. Both SKUs allow you to have the same functionality that a premium license would have. So if you are trying to do any sort of DMPO to SaaS, to any third parties, you then be able to use our gateways. The difference between them is in the number of devices we support on the corporate segment, right? So the standard one supports 1 business user with 2 concurrent devices, while the Pro one supports, again, 1 business user, but 3 devices. The second difference is in the throughput itself. So you have up to 350 meg on the standard one and up to 1 gig on the Pro one. It's up to you to decide which one is best for a particular employee. And then on top of that license, you then buy the hardware. So there is no requirement of having a particular piece of hardware at home, like the 510 LT. We usually see that people with standard subscriptions will go for a 510, 610, 510 LT, while people with a pro subscription, because they need that extra throughput, will probably benefit for going towards the 620 version. Because again, with the 5 series, you won't really be able to scale towards the 1 gig threshold. On the Workspace ONE front, our team is also busy enabling our worldwide POPs to support this offering. Currently, it is only available in our Frankfurt data centers, but in the next few months, it will also be turned on in places like Paris and London. And then following on, we're looking at Geneva, Amsterdam, Stockholm, etc. As you can imagine, there is a significant upgrade to have that extra compute power to support not only the client VPN functionality, but also the advanced security features that will get released in the next calendar year. If this is something interesting to you, and if you want to learn more, potentially do a few trials, please get in touch with our team and then we can discuss this further.